The third instance is the remonstrance of the gentlemen, ministers, and forces in the West, which, though it was a testimony given in reference to sin and duty, by a company of men who had been straight from the beginning in the work of God, in the simplicity of their hearts, and contained in it many sad truths, yet was not only rejected, but condemned by the plurality of the Committee of Estates and Commission of the General Assembly, notwithstanding that many of the members of both these judicatories dissented from it, and protested against these voices, as if had not been enough, was again resumed by the Parliament, and a most harsh censure put upon it. And all such as did not disclaim it before such a day, appointed to be proceeded against with all censures of an high nature. Other testimonies of presbyteries and synods besides these are also mentioned, for divers such there was, as the letters from the presbyteries of Stirling, Aberdeen, Glasgow, Paisley, and several other presbyteries and synods, which were written to the Commission as testimonies of their dissatisfaction with the public resolutions concerning the levy, and were rejected, and sundry of the authors thereof sharply rebuked. Nay, some of them discharged to speak their consciences, and confined in places far distant from their charge for doing thereof. In the close of this article there is mention of the neglecting of means tending to peace, and the preventing the effusion of more blood, from pride and bitterness of spirit, against these who had invaded us. We know that before this kingdom was invaded by those who hath now brought it low, there was a letter written by the Parliament to the present power in England, and duplicates thereof to the General, Lieutenant General, and General Major of their army, upon the 22nd of June, 1650, wherein they did show that as in their letter of the 6th of March, 1649, they did acknowledge their obligation and declare their resolution to observe the rule of remonstrating. First, the breaches of peace for craving just reparation, and using all fair means of giving a preceding warning of 3 months before any engagement of these kingdoms in war, so they again renew the same, and accordingly renewed the acts of posture and levy for putting this kingdom in readiness in case of invasion, which were made the former year, when they wrote the foresaid letter of the 6th of March. All which they profess solemnly to be done by them in the sincerity of their hearts, not out of any policy to catch advantages, nor for any other end or design whatsoever, but merely for their own defense, which they account abundantly sufficient to remove all grounds of jealousies and misreports of their intentions, and to take away all pretense of necessity of the marching of forces for defense of the borders of England, and, on the other part, being informed of a resolution in England to send any army to invade this kingdom, they desire to know whether these who have the present power in England acknowledge themselves obliged, or by their answer will oblige themselves, and declare their resolutions to observe the foresaid way, and order upon their part to us, and plainly and clearly to declare whether their forces march for offense or defense, whether with intention for keeping only within the borders of England, or coming within ours, which way of procedure for clearing each other and dealing plainly is not only agreeable to particular treaties, and to the many ties, bonds, and declarations passed betwixt these kingdoms, but also to the law of God, and practice of his people and his word, and to the common law and practice, even of heathen nations, much more of Christian covenanted kingdoms, and may prevent many evils and dangerous consequences which may fall out, even beyond and contrary to the intentions of the nations by their armies lying near each other upon their borders, although merely upon intended defense. This did indeed favor of a spirit of peace, and since the coming of these men into the land, there hath been such pride and bitterness of spirit, that not only were all essays of peace neglected, but every motion tending thereto, whether made by any amongst ourselves, or hinted at by any amongst them, were slighted, and sometime entertained with disdain, reproach, and contempt. And albeit the invasion was unjust, yet certainly it was our duty to have followed and endeavored peace so far as possible. Romans 12, verse 18. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Hebrews 12, verse 14. Follow peace with all men, and holiness, without which no man shall see God. Psalm 120, verse 7. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. Step 7. The seventh is the public resolutions of Kirk and State for bringing in the malignant party first to the army and then to the judicatories, and the actual entrusting of them with the power of the kingdom, both military and civil, We conceive that these public resolutions and the complex of them, besides other sins which may be mentioned, include these. First, a conjunction with the enemies of God and his cause, which is condemned by many clear scriptures. 2 Chronicles 19, verses 1 and 2, quote, "And Jehoshaphat the king of Judah returned to his house in peace to Jerusalem, and Jehu the son of Hanani the seer went out to meet him, and said to King Jehoshaphat, Shouldest thou help the ungodly, and love them that hate the Lord? Therefore is wrath on thee from before the Lord." Unquote. Isaiah 30, verses 1 through 3, quote, "Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me, and that cover with a covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, that walk to go down to Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion." Unquote. Isaiah 31, verses 1 through 3. "Woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses, and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not to the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord. Yet he also is wise, and will bring evil, and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of the evildoers, and against the help of them that work iniquity. Now the Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses flesh, and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helpeth shall fall, and he that is holpen shall fall down, and they all shall fall together." Unquote. Jeremiah 2, verse 18, quote, "And now what hast thou to do in the way of Egypt, to drink the waters of Sihor? What hast thou to do in the way of Assyria, to drink the waters of the river?" Unquote. Jeremiah 13, verse 21, quote, "What wilt thou say when he shall punish thee? For thou hast taught them to be captains, and as chief over and as chief over thee. Shall not sorrows take thee as a woman in travail?" Unquote. Number 2, the laying of a foundation of, or establishing of a rule for employing and entrusting men with the interest of the cause of God and of the kingdom, who ought not to be employed nor entrusted, if respect be had to the qualifications required in the word, that is, that they be men fearing God, hating covetousness, and dealing truly, who are appointed to be rulers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Exodus 18, verse 21, quote, "Moreover thou shalt provide of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens." Unquote. "And that they be just, ruling in the fear of God, who rule over men." 2 Samuel 23, verse 3, quote, "The God of Israel said, The rock of Israel spake to me. He that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God." Unquote. Number 3, that there was therein a breach and violation of the 4th article of the covenant, which obligeth that we be so far from giving trust to malignants, that they should endeavor to bring them to condign punishment. Number 4, that there was therein a manifest receding from the solemn public confession of sins and engagement to duties, and from the constant tenor of our declarations, warnings, and remonstrances, and causes of humiliation these years past. Jeremiah 2, verses 35, 36, and 37, quote, "Yet thou sayest, Because I am innocent, surely his anger shall turn from me. Behold, I will plead with thee, because thou sayest, I have not sinned. Why gaddest thou about so much to change thy way? Thou also shalt be ashamed of Egypt, as thou wast ashamed of Assyria. Yea, thou shalt go forth from him, and thine hands upon thine head. For the Lord hath rejected thy confidences, and thou shalt not prosper in them." Unquote. Number 5, that there was a great deal of dissidence and distrust in the arm of the Lord, and seeking of help from, and a resting on the arm of flesh. Jeremiah 17, verses 5 and 6, quote, "Thus saith the Lord, Cursed be the man that trusteth in man, and maketh flesh his arm, and whose heart departeth from the Lord. For he shall be like the heath in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, in a salt land, and not inhabited." Unquote. Number 6, that there was therein a great deal of prevarication and deceitful dealing by many. Jeremiah 5, verses 2 and 3, quote, "And though they say, The Lord liveth, surely they swear falsely. O Lord, are not thine eyes upon the truth? Thou hast stricken them, but they have not grieved. Thou hast consumed them, but they have refused to receive correction. They have made their faces harder than a rock. They have refused to return." Unquote. Because albeit the arguments that were used were taken from necessity and other things of that kind, yet the great wheel that moved in that business was a design to bring in that party into places of power and trust into the army, who had been formerly put out for their malignant and disaffected carriage, and thereafter, albeit in the beginning of this business so great haste was pretended, that they could not wait for a very few days till the commission might convene, but made use of an unfrequent and occasional meeting, when not only many of the members were absent, but also not advertised. Yet, when that which was aimed at concerning the modeling of the army was obtained, they did move but very slowly, and acted nothing at all for many months thereafter, nay, not till long after the army was completely levied, and until they had gotten the act of classes also rescinded, and that party brought to the Parliament, as well as to the army, and until the General Assembly did sit down, that they might have their approbation of these proceedings so far as was fit for them to meddle with. Number 7. There was in it a real stumbling and offense to the most part of the godly in the land, whose hearts were much grieved, and their hands exceedingly weakened thereby, together with the making glad and strengthening the ungodly and disaffected and profane in the land. Jeremiah 23, verse 14, quote, I have seen also the prophets in Jerusalem, and horrible things. They commit adultery and walk in lies. They strengthen also the hands of the evildoers, that none doth return from his wickedness. They are all to me as Sodom, and the inhabitants thereof as Gomorrah. Unquote. Ezekiel 13, verse 22, quote, Because with lies ye have made the hearts of the righteous sad, whom I have not made sad, and strengthened the hands of the wicked, that he should not return from his wicked works, by promising him life. Unquote. Lastly, the state of our cause was thereby upon the matter turned upside down, by entrusting the work and people of God to the enemies thereof. It being known and made manifest that these men did retain the same principles, and did drive on the same designs, which could not but prove destructive to religion and the people of God. Step 8. The next step is the joining of many of the people, who are engaged with God by covenant to the contrary, no less than the rulers, with the forces of the kingdom. After that, by the resolutions, there was a prevailing party of malignants brought to the army, who had the strength of counsels and actings therein, and were carrying on a malignant interest. Whatever question there may be of the associating of subjects in war with the wicked enemies of God on the command of the magistrate in a lawful cause, which seems to us to be condemned in the people of God. Isaiah 8, verses 11 through 18. Quote, For the Lord spake thus to me with a strong hand, and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, Say ye not, a confederacy, to all these to whom this people shall say, a confederacy. Neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, and let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, for a gin, and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble and fall, and be broken, and be snared, and be taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. And I will wait upon the Lord that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. Behold, I, and the children whom the Lord hath given me, are for signs and for wonders in Israel, from the Lord of hosts, who dwelleth in Mount Zion. Unquote. As well as in the magistrates, the ground of the prohibition, that is, learning of their works, and the ensnaring of the people, having a more immediate connection with the people's joining, than with the magistrates commanding them to join. Yet, as the thing is laid down in the paper, we think there will be no question about it, because it includes these particulars.